Welcome to the Business of Apps podcast. We invite app industry professionals to cover various topics. We promise to do our best to keep it both insightful and brief. In this episode, we have Jeremiah Runser, Marketing Director of Sandbox. Jeremiah, welcome to the Business of Apps podcast.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Art.
Thank you for coming. All right, I'm gonna start with setting this stage. Okay, a quick recap of app marketing industry history. There was a time, circa 2008, 2016, when all marketers were going out of the way to acquire as much installs for their apps as possible. Pretty much everyone was playing that game. Then came the moment when marketers realized that if they don't retain users they acquire, they cannot build a sustainable app business. Right, it's no brainer for you now, but back then it took time for people to shift their mentality. Ever since, we've been hearing about mobile app users churn and how to deal with it. LTV, I'm sure you know it stands for lifetime value, right? Became a very important metric. But if I ask you today, what is TTV? No, I don't mean Twitch TV. Okay, today Jeremiah will help us to expand your marketing vocabulary. But before we dive in, Jeremiah, can you start by talking about you? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'll give you a kind of quick run through. So my name is Jeremiah Runser, and I lead all marketing at Sandbox. We're a mobile and web app dedicated to supporting the military journey, really through content, technology, and community building. Those are three primary pillars that we focus on. And we really do that for different aspects of the military community, whether that is new recruits joining the military, current service members, supporters of recruits in basic training, or the military command teams within all of those echelons that I just talked about. Before Sandbox, I worked between B2B SaaS, global SaaS technology companies. I worked at Toyota, I worked at ad agencies, and I actually worked directly for the Army in marketing and PR. And maybe personally, not on the work side, I'm pretty passionate about being a father. So I got an 11-year-old kid. He's probably where I spend the second most amount of my time, aside from with my wife. So we love doing all kinds of activities together. My son's in sports. I'm an avid golfer, and I also love to rebuild vintage Honda motorcycles.
Wow, that's a great hobby. Okay, tell us about Sandbox.
Yeah, so Sandbox, I kind of briefly touched on it a second ago, but Sandbox is a platform really designed for the military community. And what we do is we streamline communication between service members and their loved ones. We're primarily known for a flagship product, Sandbox Letters. Think about how you'd get on essentially the same way you'd write an SMS. You go into the Sandbox app, you write out your letter. We automate the entire print process in Arlington, Virginia, in our print office, and we next day all mail to all basic training locations for every branch of the military. So we do around 60% of all military mail for basic training locations. And for anyone who doesn't know, that's important because for every single branch of the military, you don't get your phone at basic training. Outside of letters, though, we kind of offer a range of services, including weekly updates, which are also delivered within the Sandbox app. I'll probably get into that more here in a second. Sandbox News, we have content and dashboards for the military command teams that I mentioned earlier, and we have community features that help users connect and support each other during that military journey.
Wow, this is great. I'm sure you would love to have the app like this when you were in the military, right? Back then.
Oh yeah. Yeah, I'm still in right now, but I joined 18 years ago, and this was certainly not a thing. Uh, I don't even think I'm pretty sure I didn't even have a smartphone whenever I initially joined. Yeah, no. Smartphones didn't come around for probably 2 or 3 years after I joined the Army. So no way this is ever going to happen.
Got you. And I don't think I ever heard about app like you're describing ever. And it's kind of interesting that you gotta be in the military to stop using smartphone. You're obligated not to use it. Otherwise, there's no way you can, separate anybody from their smartphone. Um, okay. The first core question on the table is this: uh, What are some of the most effective strategies you've implemented to streamline the onboarding process for the app and ensure users are quickly engaged with your platform?
Yeah. So the first thing I'll mention is something that's probably not as applicable to a lot of mobile app companies, but I would encourage anyone to think about how you could make this applicable. We have a very, I'd almost call it at this point like a proprietary process called the FAQ process, Family Address Card process. And in some cases, we work directly with military commands to implement this FAQ process, where recruit goes to basic training. When they get to basic training, they fill out a card, either in the military exchange that is on base when they are there, or sometime within the in processing of that recruit when they initially get to that basic training location. The reason why that's so important is we capture them right at that moment. That's the most pivotal for them. They can sign up and they can send a notification free of charge to the service member, to their family members about the opportunity to use Sandbox to write letters while they are there. So because of that, we can sort of insert ourselves into a process that already happens, which helps us optimize that. And the real value is that the supporter gets to see those weekly updates, like I briefly mentioned a second ago. But they also get to just follow that trainee's journey while they're in basic training, and they get to do it from week one as opposed to week 2 or 3 when they get their first letter, and then after they get that first letter, then they can finally start writing back. And traditional mail takes, let's call it 5 to 7 business days to get to and from. So on average, you're probably getting 5 to 7 letters if you write handwritten letters, where you can probably get 2 to 3 times that using Sandbox just because of the speed of delivery on our end. So it's a really, really successful process for us. We actually onboard around, from sign up to or from install to sign up and sign up to first purchase. Both of those conversion rates are about 60%, which is virtually unheard of for most apps. And why that doesn't apply to a lot of companies is like not everybody can just kind of stand in front of somebody and onboard them. But the uniqueness of this is that we're not talking to people who have their phones at that time. They're filling out a physical card. We have a data processing team that processes all those cards, digitizes everything, and then runs it through an entire process where we basically create a unique link for every single person that signed up via the card, and then we create a unique ID for everybody who was added to that card as well. But I do think there's a lot of implications with that could be replicated for any other business. If you just think about how it would work, if you're in an airport and you want to have some sort of like out-of-home marketing within an airport, how can you replicate that same process? And then maybe step 2 of that is once they do sign up, we really have like a 3-tiered process of like the first message that goes out to anybody who signs up is, hey, here's where your recruit's at. It's pretty straightforward. Here's where your recruit's at. Here's the information about them. Here's their address. You can start writing now. Let's say that doesn't work. Step 2 is like, here's your recruit's address. Here's the information you need to know about them. Here's when they can start receiving mail. And it's a little bit more sentimental. And then the third one is more like a, hey, seems like we haven't got your attention yet. Here's exactly what you need to know. Maybe you don't want to write them, but you can still view weekly updates in the app. So if you download the Sandbox app, come here. No requirement to write, but at least you can still see the other content that we have available. And those 2 processes have really been refined over the past 2.5, 3 years to optimize a lot, which we'll probably talk more about here in a little bit, for that entire onboarding process from install to sign up to first purchase.
Just to clarify, the app kind of works only one way for somebody to write a letter to people in the military, or both ways?
Yeah, really only one way. So let's say I'm a dad writing to my son in basic training. When I write the letter, that letter is written by me digitally in the app, the same way, kind of like you'd write an SMS. And then once you hit submit, then or send letter, that letter is then processed through our entire print room in Arlington. And we next day, every single day, Monday through Friday, every weekday, all of those letters, as long as they're submitted before 5 p.m. So then that recruit gets a physical letter of the digital letter that you wrote on all the templates and letterheads that we create, which actually, I've got one right here. They look just like this. So they actually end up getting a very physical letter that is printed out that includes photos, reply stationery, and gift cards if they choose to purchase a gift card, and then a reply. Basically, this is a reply. I don't know what it's called. We'll call it like letter maybe that has the information of the person who wrote and then the information of the person who is writing back. That will go inside of a windowed envelope, so they don't even have to write anything on it. They just slide that in. It's basically the cover for that windowed envelope, and they put it back in the mail.
Got you. But it makes way easier for somebody to write to a recruit, especially right now when I don't think there is many other occasions when we write, physical mails. It's like you have to, even in my age, I used to write emails and back then, but it was like, 20, 25 years ago when I was
Hmm.
writing my last physical letter. So yeah, it's pretty convenient for somebody to, you know, keep contact with their relatives in the military and make it easier. Just the same convenience as just writing any personal message, just like texting, right?
Right. Yeah. And because they can't receive any digital communication, the only way they can actually communicate is through physical mail, which is, very, almost feels antiquated at this point, but it's still very prominent in the military.
Yeah, for sure. Um, how do you measure and optimize the time it takes for a user to realize the value of your product? And what impact does this have on their long-term loyalty?
Yeah. So, uh, answer the first question, the way we primarily measure this is TTV, which I think you mentioned earlier, but it's time to value. So we really did a lot of testing early last year. And how do we optimize for first purchase, which we would consider time to value? And how do we do that in the least amount of time? And really, that's kind of by optimizing the onboarding process, getting all the information that we need for somebody before they ever even sign up for the app. So when they do sign up, they can immediately start writing their letter. And that's how we can optimize our first purchase, is really basically enabling them to open the app and start right away. Because that is the most pivotal moment for them, and that's the most value that they will realize nearly immediately. Because once they write that first letter, once they open the app, then they can begin receiving the weekly training updates, and they can begin writing letters almost, I would say, within like the first day or two of that recruit arriving at training. So we do that through a bunch of different ways. Primarily, what we did last year was we tested different messaging. We tested we tested CTAs. We tested nearly everything that we possibly could, different timing, different sequences, all different variables to really see how do we get somebody in, show them value right away, optimize for the onboarding process, get them through the onboarding process as fast as possible. Once they're through the onboarding process, optimize for that first purchase to send their first letter.
Yeah, I think TTV, the term I introduced in my intro and I was joking about, is really applicable for many app developers. And if I may, I would compare it with, like, if you're in the Starbucks, you're taking your coffee. The first sip of a coffee will be the moment you realize the value of that cup of the coffee.
Right.
So think about, like, what would be an equivalent of that moment for your app, and what time does it take between your first interaction with your potential user and the moment when he or she gets that value. So yeah, this is really important, how fast you can do it, like what you can optimize, what you can tweak to make it faster.
Yeah. I want to say was, if I may get this wrong, but if I remember correctly, Facebook had, I believe it was like if they added 7 friends within the first 7 days, or maybe it was like 10 friends within the first 7 days, they were like 60% more likely to become an active user of Facebook. And this is how I mean, again, they did a bunch of testing on this, but I think that's kind of how they measure time to value. How do you see the most value in the platform, which means getting people much more engaged early on in the process and optimizing for long-term value, which is like, past the 10-day mark or 7-day mark or whatever it was. There was an entire case study done on this. I think I read it sometime a couple of years ago, but it's really good for anyone who wants to look into that, because there's so much data on how Facebook did this that is very applicable to many other businesses.
Absolutely, that's a great case, the great guidelines for you to see how you can apply the same experience to your app.
Right.
Now, what tactics have proven successful in transforming first-time users into repeat customers? And how do you maintain high engagement levels throughout their life cycle?
Yeah. So I think it's really primarily three things. The biggest one are the weekly updates, which I'll go deeper on now. I touched on them a couple of times. So our weekly training updates are let's say you go to Fort Jackson, and these are all dynamic and specific to every single base because every base has different training requirements. And within those bases, every training group sort of has different training requirements. So just because you go to Fort Moore, let's say for basic training, there's two tracks at Fort Moore. There's the Fort Moore one station unit training, or otherwise known as OSUT infantry track, or there's the armor OSUT track. And up until week 10, it's kind of the same for both. Not exactly, but then after week 10, it sort of changes. So if we just made them specific to Fort Moore, you wouldn't really get the full picture as a mom who has no idea what happens in the military when your son or daughter is at basic training. So we've really built these personalized journeys. So we have all training weeks for all different branches, all different bases, all different training tracks. And these weekly updates are delivered and unlocked on a weekly basis. So if you're in week one, or let's say your recruit is in week one, you as a mom will get a notification about what's happening in week one of basic training. That brings you back to the app. When you open the app, you can view those week one updates, and then you can send a letter from that weekly update. And what happens more often than not are people actually write about what is in those weekly updates, because let's say week 4, maybe you're going to the rifle range for the first time. You don't really know what's happening then. You don't really know what they're going through. So it gives you something to kind of write about and motivate them while they're at that basic training, while they're in that basic training week. And those happen throughout the entire cycle. So that's one of the biggest ones for us. But I also think, and maybe it's a big shout out, but Iterable has launched a bunch of new features really over the past year or two. We piloted embedded messaging, and with embedded messaging, it really almost eliminates the requirement for us to work with or through engineering to launch any native app messaging, because we could build all of that into segmentation and personalization that we already have in Iterable for all of our other campaigns. So now we can just display this dynamic content within the app, and it's specific to each user based on wherever they're at in their journey or based on anything that they are doing within the Sandbox app or any personalized profile fields. So that has been kind of instrumental for us. But they've also launched a new, I can't remember exactly what they named it, but it's an AI journey creation. So if you want to build an upsell or a win back campaign, you just kind of ask their AI little orchestration module thing, how do you build me a win back campaign for somebody who hasn't made a first purchase yet? And it'll basically create all of the tiles and segmentation and delays for everything that would go into that journey, and then you just fill it in with the journey content. So things like that have made our jobs significantly easier because we don't have to spend as much time thinking about what the journey looks like, and we can spend much more time building the things and making them useful.
All right. We've just covered the topic on the table, but because it's your first time on the show, there's a second part where I ask a few quick questions, helping us all to know you a little bit better. I want to build a quick portrait of every guest on this podcast. So here we go. Just a few quick questions. What smartphone do you have now? Are you been switching between iOS and Android or one side all the time?
I've never owned an Android phone. I can almost confidently say I never will. Maybe that'll change someday. That said, it's good timing because I actually had an iPhone 11 up until like 2 weeks ago, and my phone never broke. It never got scratched. So I just never got a new one. But I work for, a mobile app company, and every time I'm viewing screenshots or anything, it's like it doesn't really work effectively anymore. So I finally did get a new phone. I have an iPhone 15 now, a few weeks ago, and that is like. It's been a real change because I didn't go from like 11 to 12, 12 to 13. Now it's like an entirely new like ecosystem in a 15 than what it was in 11. But yeah, I don't think the technology is really important. I think there's a lot of cool features, but not a lot has changed significantly, I think for a while it did. Now it's just sort of progressive year over year.
Wow, I can imagine. That's a huge leap from 11 to 15.
Yeah.
I switched to 13 from 11, and I do remember that it was a pretty big leap for me. But I can imagine like 4 generations up, that's pretty significant. All right, let's take a quick jump to the past. Do you remember your first mobile phone?
Ooh, my first phone that I bought that I remember was a Motorola Razr, and I had that. I probably had 4 of them because at that time you could like your phone would break and you just get a new phone for free. And like service providers were pretty good about just like replacing phones all the time. And I think I had one of nearly every color. And then I got a right after that, after graduated basic training, I got a what was it? It was I think it was an LG Upstage. Basically, it was this two-sided phone. One side looked like almost like a Nokia phone that had just a keypad and then a screen, and then the other side wasn't a touch screen, but it looked kind of like an iPod, and it was supposed to be like an iPod on one side and then a mobile phone on the other side. I don't even know. I was probably one of like 20 people to ever have that phone. I think it lasted for like a year, but that was like one of my basic training purchases that I made irresponsibly.
Wow, that's pretty rare beast. Back to present. So imagine you left your smartphone at home, you're out. What would be the most missing feature for you?
That's a good question. Probably the weather. I check the weather. I golf a lot and I check the weather 4 or 5 times a day just to see when it's going to rain. But I do, I say that, but I do often just kind of leave my phone so I don't. I mean, I'm always on it and it's nice to just kind of like get away from it. But I do think that's the thing that I would miss not knowing because I check it so often and it's such a great utility for me. It's actually one of the only apps I pay for is AccuWeather because I think I pay like $20 a year just to not have to see ads and to be able to see the radar. And that is like so beneficial for me.
Gotcha. So in many cases, you deliberately leave your smartphone at home just to, make a break from your high tech in your pocket.
Right.
Speaking of high tech, what would be the feature, either hardware or software or both, that would make your smartphone a better tool for you? Nothing fancy, nothing trendy, but specifically for you, what would be that feature?
Hardware, I don't know if there's really any hardware. I would say software, like probably a couple things. Maybe one thing that solves all of it is workflow automations, which is primarily meant for like B2B SaaS tools. But one thing I often find myself trying to do is like if I want to schedule an SMS message to go out tomorrow, I will forget. I know I'll forget to send it tomorrow by the time that time comes, whether it's somebody's birthday or if it's a notification to somebody to like set up a meeting or set up that meeting, I can just text them, but I can't ever build workflows or automations to do that. And there's sort of bypasses to do that within, I think it's Apple Shortcuts, but I just wish that there was like a feature or functionality to just automate workflows within my phone so I don't have to set reminders all the time to do things.
Yeah, I totally hear what you're saying, especially when you're working on multiple projects. You have a team of people to work with, and that will be a great tool to make your work life a little bit easier for sure. All right, before I let you go, very, very final question. How can people get in touch with you and get more information about what you do?
Yeah, I think probably the best way is reach out to me on LinkedIn at just my first name, last name on LinkedIn, or send me an email at firstname.lastname@me.com. And I'm pretty responsive on there. So I'm happy to chat with anyone about anything related to this or golfing or motorcycles.
Great. Jeremiah, thank you so much for coming on our podcast and spending time with us. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you.
And that was Jeremiah Rancer, Marketing Director of Sandbox. To listen to more episodes, subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, YouTube podcasts. Just search for Business of Apps and you will find us easily. Remember, we release episodes on Mondays, so subscribe. And you will be able to get new episodes of this show on your smartphone, tablet, or computer as soon as we release them. And please don't forget to leave us a review or comment on iTunes. It is highly appreciated. And all episodes will also be available on businessofapps.com. Thank you for listening. See you next week.